We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Aleph and Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 68a. The Gemara is continuing to discuss the case in the Mishnah where you have a situation of an Arusa. So let's say you have a situation of a Bas Kohen and she's an Arusa to a Yisrael. So in that case, the Kiniya Bahavoya. There is a Kinyan over here, Bahavoya, as Rashi over here says. The Kanya Bahavoya Umishas Havoya Ifsala. From the moment of Havoya, when there is an Erison over here between her and the Yisrael. So now he puzzles her, the Yisrael puzzles her from Truma. Just like the pasuk says, Uvas Kohen Kisihya Leish Zar. It uses the word Sihya, meaning Havoya. Any kind of kedushin to an Ish Zar, to a person who's not a Kohen, passes her from the Truma of the house of her father. And the Gemara continues the other way around as well. V'i Bas Yisrael Kohen. If the situation where she's a Bas Yisrael and she has an Erison with a Kohen, so Lo Machila, that's not going to be enough to allow her to eat Truma Mishum De'ula. Now that's because of what Ula said. Rashi over here says Mishum De'ula v'Mesechet Ksubis b'Perek Afapi. This is a Mesechet Ksubis. Devar Torah Arusa Bas Yisrael Ochelas B'Truma. Actually, on a Doraisa level, if a Bas Yisrael is betrothed to a Kohen, she actually could eat Truma. Dechsiv Kinyan Kaspo Hu Yachol Bo. It says Kinyan Kaspo. Umatam Amru Ein Ochelas. Now, why is it that she doesn't eat Truma? That's a Gezerah Shemiyim Zugu Lakos Bevei Savia V'Telech V'Tashke Le'achea V'Lachosa. The problem is, what might happen is he's going to give her some Truma, and right now she's just an Arusa. She's in the house of her father. What if she goes ahead and shares that Truma? She gives to drink to her brother, to her sister. That's going to be a problem. That's why Ula says at the period of time of Erison, it's not allowed. She's not allowed to have Truma, even though on a Doraisa level, once she has an Erison with a Kohen, she's allowed Truma. That is not allowed Midrabanan. And the Gemara continues, V'hacherish, let's say you have a situation of a deaf mute, and the Gemara says, Ibas Kohen li Yisrael he, if the case over here is that it's a Bas Kohen, and she's with a Cherish who's a Yisrael, so pasala. So then again, he's going to pasal her from Truma. Why? To Akanya b'takanta derabanan, because a Cherish can be kona a woman on a derabanan level. Rashi over here says, b'takanta derabanan, to Cherish afagav de lav bardasu, even though a Cherish is a lav bardas, so on a doraisa level he has no kinyanim, he can't have marriage. Takinu be rabbanan nisuin lakamon, but Cherish and so later on we'll see that the Rabbanan say there is nisuin for a cheresh, and so since there is nisuin for a cheresh on a Rabbanan level, that's enough to passel her from Truma, again, if it's with a Yisrael. V'bas Yisrael a Kohen. Now, if it's the other way around again, let's say she's a Bas Yisrael, and she gets married to a Kohen cheresh, lo machil, that's not going to be enough to allow her to eat Truma, kinyan kaspo amar achmana, because again, it says it has to be kinyan kaspo, v'hai lav bar kinyan hu, and again, on a doraisa level, a cheresh is not allowed to make a kinyan. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Uventesha Shanim V'chulu. Then the Mishnah had this case of, let's say you have a situation of a 9-year-old, a child who's a 9-year-old, and so now the Gemara has to explain what's going on in that case. So the Gemara says, Kasal Kadaitach. Right now we think that what the Mishnah means is as follows. B'shomeres Yavam lebentesha v'yom. She's actually a shomeres Yavam. She's a waiting Yibam to a child who is 9 years old. And so the Gemara says, Lamai. So for what are we talking about? Ila mifsal, if we're talking about in terms of pasaling, so katanami mifsal pasal. It doesn't make a difference that he's 9 years old, even if he'd be younger. Even a total katan can pasal a woman. Let's say she was a Bas Kohen and he's a Yisrael. Even a shomeres yavam to a yavam who's a katan can pasal from Truma. And ilachule, and if it's in order to allow her to eat Truma, in other words, the case would be she's a Bas Yisrael and she's awaiting Yibam to a Kohen, and he's 9 years old, so Gadol Nami Lo Machil, so it doesn't matter 9 years old, even an adult, if she's just a Shomeres Yavam, that's not enough to allow her to eat Truma. As Rashi over here says, Kasal Kadaitach B'Shomeres Yavam Leben Tes V'lo Ba'aleho. Right now we think she's awaiting Yibam, there was no act of relations. Ulamai Hilchasad Nakat Ben Tes, and so that's why the Gemara says, well, for what practical nafkamina does it make that he's 9 years old? If you're going to say that once they are fit to have bia, that passes with the zeka, that zeka bond is enough to passel her from Truma, Ma'ir Yabentes, you don't even need to have him be 9 years old. Afilu katanami delo karina and bavishavel beisavia, even if he's a katan also, she's not returning to her father's house. Belashmin and batsumi bentes, you can give the exact same case less than 9 years old. V'ilachule, v'ilahachin nakat bentes, lashmin and ribusa, and if you're going to say it tells a chiddush, even though he's 9 years old, even though he's able to have bia, we say that a 9-year-old is old enough to have bia. Lo machil yevemto bezekaso, still he doesn't allow the Yevamot to eat the truma. But afilu gadol mamish lo machil. We said even an adult wouldn't be enough. The lav kinyanu hu dashminan begadol bereisha demasis. And in the beginning of the Mishnah, we already said that shomeres yavam is not considered a kinyan. It's not enough for her to have truma. So again, there wouldn't be any practical nafkamina to list a case of 9 years old. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Abaya says, Hacha biyavam ben teisha shanim v'yom echad. Here the case is where he is again a brother-in-law who's 9 years old in a day. Habal Yevamto askinan, and the case is they actually do have relations. They have the act of bia, which is yibam, to mida oraisa kanyale, and here on a doraisa level there's a kinyan. So salgadai dechamina. So I might have thought ho'olam mida oraisa kanyale ubiaso bia. Since this is a doraisa kinyan and the relations of a child who's 9 years old is considered an act of relations, so emalochil. So I might actually think that could allow her to eat truma. Let's say you have a situation where she's a Bas Yisrael and he's a Kohen, and they have this bia which is considered a full yibum, maybe she should eat truma. And so the Gemara says, no, Kamash Malana comes to teach us, this is the Chiddush of the Mishnah, Asu bias ben teshana v'yom echad k'maimer begadol. When you have bia with a child, with a boy who's 9 years old, that's no better than doing maimer with a gadol. Maimer, again, is like the first stage of yibum. It's like the betrothal stage of the yibum process with an adult. That would not be enough to allow her to eat truma, and so too the bias ben teshana v'yom echad will not allow her to eat truma. And so the Gemara continues, Amar le Rava. So now Rava said back to him, meaning Rava responded to Abaya. If that's how you understand the Mishnah, that we're talking about a situation of bia with the 9-year-old. So Seiva de Katani Safik ben teshana v'yom echad Safik she'eno. So now the end of the Mishnah was a case of, let's say, it's a doubt whether he's 9 years old or not. We said over there also the same halachas apply. And so it doesn't make any sense. Hashda vadai ben teslo machil. If we already said that a child who's certainly 9 years old, it's not enough to allow her to eat truma. So Safik, me boy, we need to give you a case of a Safik. That's obvious that a Safik is not going to allow her to eat truma. In other words, according to Abai, that the whole chiddush of the Mishnah in bringing the 9-year-old was to tell you that the 9-year-old does not allow her to eat truma, then you don't even need to bring the case of the Safik. And so the Gemara says, Elam Rava, rather Rava says, the case of the Mishnah is as follows, Beben teisha shonim v'yom echad dehanach psulim katani, depasli b'biyasim. The case of the Mishnah is, we're talking about a 9-year-old, a child who's 9 years old, who's one of the situations which normally passes her through the act of bia. The halacha is that if the woman has bia with somebody that it's usher for her to have bia with, that can passel her from truma, that can also passel her from being allowed to marry a Kohen, and we're saying that 9 years old is enough. Uchidetanya, like we learned in a Brisa, ben teisha shanim v'yom echad, if you have a 9-year-old ger, Amoni, or Moavi, Mitzri, Vadomi, Kusi, Nisin, Cholol, or Mamzer, all of these cases are individuals who are not allowed to have the relations, the act of relations is going to be forbidden. In all of these cases, Shabo al Kohenes, Levia v'Yisraelis, if they have relations with a Kohenes, a Levia, or a Yisraelis, Paslua, that is enough to passel her from Truma, that is enough to passel her from a Kohen. And the Gemara continues, Vav mida katani seifa, but since it says in the seifa, Im einon ru'uyin lavo b'Yisrael hareelu poslim, if they're not able to come to Yisrael, they passel. So mechlal dereisha labib sulam. In other words, the end of this Mishnah, the Mishnah is going to go on to say, by a case of a posel, by such a situation, they can passel. That sounds like all of these cases, the early part of the Mishnah is not talking about situations of people who are posel, of people who are not allowed to have relations. And so the Gemara answers very simply, reisha psule kohal, seifa psule kuna. They're talking about different kinds of psulim. In the beginning of the Mishnah, we're talking about people who are not allowed to marry into the community. In the Sefer, we're talking about situations of people who are specifically puzzle to kahuna, but both parts of the Mishnah are talking about situations of psulim. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here, Habal Yevamto. Again, according to Abaya, the case was the 9-year-old has relations with the Yevamot, the ilu gadol have it. So the idea is simple. If this would have been an adult achli, so then she could eat truma. The ashmin and ribuza, the afagav to bia, so bia. And the chiddush of the Mishnah is, even though a 9-year-old's bia is considered a legitimate act of bia, lo machil, so we say still they're not allowed to, that does not allow the woman to eat truma. So now, according to this understanding of Abaya, when it says in the Mishnah the idea that the act of relations will passel, that's actually not going on the case of the 9-year-old. That's going on the other cases. Ubur v'yavam below bia ve'erisin v'cherish. It's going on the case of the fetus or the yavam or the case of erisin and the cherish. Avol ben teslo nakat le elamisham ve'ein machilin. When it comes to the 9-year-old, the only reason we have that case is to say that the 9-year-old does not allow the woman to eat truma. And the reasoning for that, again, is, like the Gemara said earlier, that when it comes to passeling her, even a katan in a situation of a shomeres yavam would passel her from truma. So again, the only reason we're talking about a 9-year-old over here is to say a chiddush that even with an act of bia, it's not going to allow her to eat truma. And so then the Gemara continued with Rava's response, if the only reason we have this case is to say that he doesn't allow her to eat truma, so lamali lemisni seifa the katani safek shu ben tisha safek she'eno have a nami ben tes hashta vare ben tes v'chulu. Then you don't need a case of safek. Obviously, if the 9-year-old doesn't allow her to eat truma, of course a safek 9-year-old will not allow her to eat truma. So instead we answered that we're talking here about psulin, and Rashi says kagon mamzer unesin. We're talking about a situation where she has relations with, let's say, a mamzer or a nesin, those kind of psulim, umishum poslim nakadle. And the reason is, on the contrary, the reason is that we have this case to say that it passes her from having truma. Velo machilin. We're not talking about the fact that they're allowing her to eat truma. We're talking about the fact that these acts of relations with these individuals, the mamzer, the nesin, etc., can pass her from truma. And again, velo machilin lo ben teskoy. According to this answer of Rava, velo machilin is not going on the 9-year-old again. Ela ashara ubur v'yavam eris and v'cheresh. It's going on the other cases. Ben tisha shu ger amoni or moavi. And again, these are the cases: a 9-year-old who's a convert, who's an Ammoni or Moavi, the Asur and Lavo Bekal, the Ger Ammoni and the Ger Moavi are not allowed to marry into the community. Mitzri ve'Adomi, Ador Shlishi B'asei. Also, if you have a convert, Mitzri and Adomi, until the 3rd generation, there's an Isser Asei, they can't marry. Kusi unesin, below Tischatin Bum, the Kasavar Gerei Arayosein. So by the Kusim, we consider them to be Gerei Arayos. They're only converts because they were scared of the lions. That's the story in the Navi. And the Nesinim also, like we said, the Givonim, they're not allowed to marry into the community. Cholol pasal the kahuna. Cholol is pasal to the kahuna. So pasluim bas kohen minat truma levia v'Yisraelis linasi lekuna olamis. If she's a bas kohen, they pasel her from eating truma. And let's say she's not a bas kohen, they also pasel her from marrying into the kahuna. And so then the question on this answer was midakatani seifa demasnis. In the end of the Mishnah says, also talks about psulim, but sounds like the reisha is not psulim. And so the Gemara says no, there actually are different kinds of psulim. Seifa psulei kahuna chalal, meaning in the seifa we're talking specifically about people that are pasel for kohanim, meaning a chalal. Now, even though we're talking about cases that they can't marry into Klal Yisrael, we're talking only about kahuna. In the Reisha, you only have a case of psulei kol, you don't have bias chalal. The only reason we bring the seifa is that extra mission tells us that the same halacha is true when it comes to a chalal. And again, what Rashi is referring to is that the seifa, meaning the later Mishnah says, it uses the language that they can't marry into Yisrael, but if we're only talking about chalalim, it really is only referring to Kohanim, and that's what Rashi says, that it's true. In the first part of the Mishnah, in our Mishnah, we're talking about people that can't marry into the community of Klal Yisrael at all, and in the Seifa, even though it uses the language of love of Yisrael, it's just adding on the idea of chalalim, that chalalim as well can passel from Kahuna. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above, Ben Tes Shanim v'Yomechad, if you have a 9-year-old boy, Ger Amoni, Umavi, Mitzri, Vedomi, Kusi, Nesin, Chalal, Mamzer, again, the whole list of people that passel a woman from Truma and from Kohanim, Shabo al Kohenes, Levi of Yisraelis, if any of these individuals have relations with a Kohenes, a Levi, or a Yisraelis, passel, and they then passel them from Truma or from Kahuna. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol Shazaro passel, any situation where the children is passel, so posel, then it also passels. Kol Shein Zaro passel, but any situation where the child is not passel, Eino posel, then that does not cause a psul. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Kol she'atanose bito, any situation where a person can marry his daughter, atanose al manuso, the person can also marry his widow. V'chol she'en atanose bito, any case where he can't marry his daughter, I atanose al manuso, he's not allowed to marry his widow. And Rashi over here says, Paslua kohenes mitruma debei nasha. Again, it passels, let's say she's a kohenes, these acts of relations will passel the kohenes from truma from her father's house. Umina kohuna levi of Yisraelis mina kohuna. And also, again, the kohenes is obviously passel to marry a kohen, and the levi and Yisraelis, they could never have truma, but they're going to be passeled from kahuna. Rabbi Yossi Omer, then we had an additional 2 explanations over here in the Brisa. We had Rabbi Yossi who said, Kol shezaro pasel posel, and we had Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Kol shatanose bito, atanose al manuso. Rashi says, time of the Rabbi Yossi of Rabbi Shimon, meforish lakaman b'shmaitin. The reasoning of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, that will be explained later on. My ko amri, what exactly they are saying, or my pluksayu, and what they are arguing about. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots, Minoha Hanimili, from where do we know this idea that if a woman has relations with somebody who's pasul, that she can be pasul from truma and she can be pasul from marrying a kohen? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Amar Kra, because the pasuk says uvas kohen kisiya li'ish zar. It says that if the bas kohen is with a ish zar, meaning you have a person who's a non-kohen, and we understand that to mean kevon shenivala lepasala pasla. When she has relations with somebody who she is pasul to, that pasels her. And so the Gemara says, one second, Haimi boile de kamar achmana bas kohen the minsav lizar lo seichel. But that pasuk is needed for what it's implying. The pasuk means to say that if you have a bas kohen who was allowed to eat truma because she was a bas kohen, but if she marries a zar, if she marries a non-kohen, lo seichel, she's not allowed to eat truma. The pasuk's simple explanation makes perfect sense. How can you darshan it to relate to the idea that she has relations with somebody who's pasul? And so the Gemara says to that, no, ahi mi v'shava el beis avia kinureha mi lechem avia tochel nafka. No, that already is learned out from the pasuk that says that, let's say her husband dies, so she returns to her father's house, or let's say she gets divorced, she returns to her father's house, and then she can have truma. So midikama rachman of v'shava el beis avia, from the fact that the pasuk says she returns to her father's house, tochel, and she can eat the truma, mechlal demei kara lo achla. That sounds like when she was married to the Yisrael that she's not allowed to have truma. So we already know the idea that she's not allowed to eat truma when she's married to a non-kohen. So again, this pasuk of uvas kohen kisiya lish zar means to say that if she has relations with somebody she's pasul to, she is pasul from kahuna and pasul from truma. But the Gemara says, one second, that's not true. Imeahi, if you only had this pasuk of vishavel beis avia, rather, if you only had that pasuk, havamina, then I might think lava ba mechlal asay asay. That's a negative, that's an implied from a positive commandment. It says she returns to her father's house to eat truma, so it's implied that beforehand she could not eat truma. That's only the level of an asay. So kasav rachmana hay lilav. So doesn't the pasuk write this case over here of ubas kohen kisiya leish zar? Wouldn't that be a lav? And it would say that again, if she marries a zar, she's prohibited to have truma. So we do need this pasuk. And so the Gemara says, lav, the lav is actually derived mi v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh nafka. It says that any non-kohen cannot eat kodesh. And right now the Gemara's understanding that means again the case of a bas kohen who's married to a zar cannot have truma. Rashi over here says, lav mi v'chol zar nafka v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh v'hashta sal kadaitoch to kosavar dehach bas kohen nami mishtama mine. Right now we think that a bas kohen who's married to a zar is also included in this pasuk of chol zar lo yochal kodesh hoel v'nisis li Yisrael, since she married a Yisrael. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Ches Amud Beis.